with other ensembles, and of course we cooperate, and we have our mutual friends of Sam Heron and Gabriel Kermeens, and there's also a lot of interchange back and forth. And one of the things too, where we sort of started off very much on our own, now we're part of a networked community of chant in English in the States. Before, John and I were part of an international community of chant in Greek and other languages, but that's one of the real changes that's happened. And so we also see ourselves as being part of this wider group of people, and we are eager also to work with them and collaborate and to the greater glory of God.
Excellent.
We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's 10 singers. And then actually for two of the antiphons that we re-recorded because of a change in the second, in between the time we did the recording sessions and we're starting into post-production, a new edition of the Divine Liturgy came out, the second edition in the UK. So we changed the antiphon verses some for that. So then we added 2 more singers. For that in that, because we were there. I think we then went back to Holy Rosary to record a medieval, I think it was Sinai that we were recording at that time. Yeah,
Sinai. Yeah. So we had 6, but for the main recording we had 6 people on melody and 4 on Ison, and then as Alexander said, we a couple years later ended up recording a few psalm verses for the antiphons, and then inserting them. And so, I mean, we're sort of, giving away the magic here, but if you listen really closely, you can sort of hear it slightly change in sound between what we did in 2005 and what we did in 2007. But it's pretty seamless if you don't listen for
it. Was that your first time doing edit plots?
Yeah, my first time doing edit plots was this project, the Divine Liturgy. I'm better at it now, but as I think as it went, it came out pretty well. Mm-hmm. But I was very much learning my way as far as editing goes at that point.
Actually, yeah. I'm just looking at the booklet again, and I actually list the full editorial committee too. So we had also passed materials by Mark Bailey and Jessica Suchipalalis, in addition to Vlad Morazan. Right. So we really tried to reach out at the time. And
how could you do that differently now? What would be sort of, if you were wanting to put together an exemplary recording like that now, what would you do differently?
It's interesting you say that. I remember talking with our producer, Steve Barnett, about this, that because in post-production, we did a lot of the work of placing the various
Orthodox music, lectures, prayers, and more on Ancient Faith Radio. Thanks for your support.
This is Ancient Faith Today with Father Tom Soroka, a weekly live call-in show addressing the issues of our day from a distinctly Orthodox perspective. You can join the conversation by calling in at 855-237-2346. That's 855-AF-RADIO. Father Tom is the priest at St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and welcomes guests from across the globe to discuss important topics of interest. Here's Father Tom.
Welcome to Ancient Faith Today. This is Father Tom Soroka, and I'm so glad that you're with us this evening. We'll be taking your calls in a bit at 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Trudy will be answering your calls tonight, so please make sure to turn the show volume off before you come on air. To participate online, we encourage you to go either to the AFR Facebook page at facebook.com/Ancient Faith Radio. and place a question in the thread for tonight's show where it is being live simulcast. Or you can also go to facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday and place your question there in the thread for tonight's show. You can also send us an email at aft@ancientfaith.com. So let's get started. Listeners who are older than maybe about 50 and have been Orthodox all their lives will likely remember the time when Orthodox parish deacons were not a thing. In fact, the only time you ever saw a deacon was when your bishop came to visit the parish, usually once a year or even less. And then, that wasn't always the case. Back then, deacons were a kind of liturgical specialist. They knew how to serve the hierarchical liturgy with a bishop, and then generally told the priests where to stand and what to do during that rarely served service in the parish. They often were also the bishop's assistant and driver, taking him from place to place, carrying his luggage full of vestments. Nevertheless, it was rare to see a deacon in those days. The diaconal role, 99 times out of 100, was simply an office that men stayed in for only a short period of time on their way to the holy priesthood. But in the 1970s, that began to change. The idea of having men serving permanently as deacons in parishes began to be reestablished. While this is certainly not a universal Orthodox phenomenon even today, it's much more common than it was 50 years ago in America. Some men who might already be well established in their family life and in their career, and who may not be called to be a priest, and are not in a place in their life to enter formal seminary studies, but may be called to minister in the church in a more significant way, can now enter a vocational program to become a deacon. All of the major canonical Orthodox jurisdictions in America have robust programs to theologically and liturgically educate men who may be ordained to serve as deacons in a parish. And if you remember the image I used, that of the deacon carrying the bishop's luggage and driving him around, without denigration, that's a fairly accurate snapshot of what being a deacon is all about. He's the servant. He's a waiter. He's a minister. All of these roles coming from the Greek term diakonos. Maybe the one undeveloped aspect of the modern Orthodox diaconal role is that often, not always, but often, the office of the deacon is limited to purely a liturgical function. That is, he presents the petitions during the divine services. He assists the priests in the liturgical actions. But limiting the diaconal role to a liturgical function is to actually betray the very biblical foundations of this office. The 6th chapter of Acts of the Apostles makes it clear that the apostles needed help. The apostles were being taken away from their most important task, to preach and teach the Word of God. They needed men to help do the foot and the hand work, what Acts 6:2 called diakoneo trapeza, to wait on tables. In other words, they needed someone to handle the distribution of food, money, and other charitable endeavors in the growing young church. So, that begs the question of today's deacons and today's parishes. How can deacons today be utilized effectively to expand parish ministries beyond simply a liturgical role? And what about parishes that want to expand ministries without having a deacon? What can they do effectively to outreach to their parishioners and beyond? To help us answer these questions, I'm proud to welcome Deacon Luke Laboda. Deacon Luke is the deacon at St. Nicholas Orthodox Church in McKees Rocks, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where he also takes a leading role in outreach and educational ministries. He's a professional educator teaching American law and justice at a high school in the Pittsburgh area. He's a graduate of Ashland University in Ohio, earning a master's degree in American history and government. A lifelong Orthodox Christian, he's the grandson of a proto-deacon. He and his wife, Dr. Ashley Loboda, have 3 sons, as well as a beautiful adopted daughter from Bulgaria. And with that, we'd like to welcome Deacon Luke Loboda. Father Deacon Luke, welcome to Ancient Faith Today.
Hi. Thank you, Father.
Oh, I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm looking forward to this discussion. I honestly have to tell everyone that I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of the ideas that you have, of the energy that you show in your ministry, the beauty with which you serve the services, but also the idea that you have helped our parish both understand the need for and then lead in the actions of reaching out to the community, of helping us teach. And it's really been a great pleasure and an honor to serve with you at the altar, but also to serve the people of God. So what I'd like to do is have our listeners today, and we want to remind everybody, we would love to hear from you before we get started here. Do you have a question about the diaconate? Are you a deacon and you'd like to talk with Deacon Luke about his ministry or share news about your ministry? Maybe you're a priest and you want to brag on your deacon. Call in. We'd love to hear from you. So, Father Deacon, tell us a little bit about your spiritual background and why you became a deacon.
Sure. Thank you, Father. And thank you so much for that very humbling introduction. But so I come from an Orthodox family of a Slavic background, and I grew up in Northeast Ohio. And for most of my childhood, I did serve in the altar. Never envisioned myself becoming, a deacon or a member of the clergy at all. I really went through a period of struggle as a teenager in high school, and really wasn't. It was during my college years that I became more serious about my faith, and I have to say I really started to actually read the scriptures at that time in my life carefully, and I came to see that so much of what I was taught was actually in there. It was in the scriptures. Everything I was taught about the the clergy of the sacraments, and kind of my eyes opened up that it wasn't just something that was in the books in church school. It was all really there from the beginning. So that really helped me to drive my desire to be involved in the life of the church. My family was always very involved. My mother, my aunts, uncles, all served in different ways. But as you mentioned before, a big influence for me was my grandparents, or I would call them my Baba and my Dedo. And my Baba was always a model of love and patience, and my Dedo was just a model of dedication and service to the church. Before he was a deacon, he actually was. That really was a small part of his life in the church, because he was a choir director for over 55 years at his parish in Lorain, Ohio. So he was a choir director and council president for many years, and it was much later in his life that he was ordained a deacon. So as I was entering adulthood and trying to find small ways to serve in my parishes, I kind of I started to have in the back of my head the idea that maybe someday I'd become a deacon, possibly, but I have to admit it was more of a maybe a retirement plan of some sort. When I had time, when I was retired from teaching, I'd retire early, and the kids would be out of the house, and so then I have all this time, and also kind of I rationalize that, okay, maybe I'll be more worthy of this position someday. But what happened was that our parish was just in need of a deacon, and there may have been a slight suggestion from from my priest that maybe I consider that possibility. Maybe a slight suggestion somewhere was kind of a word put out. So I did consider that, and to be honest, at first I did not want to do it. On the practical level, as you mentioned, my wife Ashley is a doctor, and she had just finished her medical training, and we were just kind of exhausted. We had 3 young boys, all 5 years young and old, younger than that. So it's like things were just starting to get normal in our life, and I prayed about it, and it became obvious to me that maybe I did not want to be a deacon, but God wanted me to be a deacon. So once I discerned that, there really was no choice, and so I did. I was accepted into the Diaconal Vocations program in 2014, and through God's grace was ordained in 2016.
Indeed. Often these vocations are never convenient. They never come at a time where somehow it seems like the right time. All the, everything, all the cards are in the right order. It just never seems to happen that way. And maybe somehow God is, is sort of testing us to say that, how much do you really love me? How much do you want to serve me? And actually, this brings up a question. Of course, I think our listeners know that often I send a list of questions to our guests beforehand, but I want to put you on a spot a little bit here and have you, before we go into the sort of the nuts and the bolts of the diaconate, because you did mention, when this came up, and, it was not the most convenient time. What are some of the challenges that you face as a vocational deacon? In other words, you have a full-time job, you have 4 children, your wife has a very busy job also, and you're trying to balance your household responsibilities, your responsibilities with your children. You coach football, right? So you have all of this stuff going on, but you really are very actively involved in the parish. How do you manage to do all of that? How do you sort of decide, what is important and taking on these roles and all of the divine services that you serve and assist at, and vigil and liturgies and so forth. Sometimes you serve several liturgies in a week with me. How does that work out? If, in other words, if someone asked you right now, I don't think I could do this, how do you do that? What would you tell them?
Well, I mean, I'm blessed to, of course, have a very supportive Matushka Ashley, and earlier in the show, you very kindly introduced me, and I have to say that I kind of view the role as helping sometimes others to find their role within the church and how that they can assist. So if someone was to say, I can't really do this, I guess my advice would be that it's not just going to be you, really you're going to be playing a role in helping to organize and delegate those responsibilities. And yes, it's going to be, to, of course, increase your responsibilities, but you're not going to be, on your own with it.
It's a really good point. And especially for those of us that are married and have helpmeets that are supportive and do a lot of things behind the scenes that people don't know about. And, we need that support from our wives to be understanding, or to, when we have to drop things at a moment's notice and leave and minister to someone, our wives are there to help us and to assist us with the household chores. And of course, with church duties also. Your wife, my wife, they're deeply involved in the parish. And as I know, the vast majority of priests' wives and deacons' wives are. All right, so let's remind everybody.
I have to say real briefly.
Yeah, no, please go ahead. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that just kind of a silly story that I was telling, Ashley about at the council meeting, I said this and, how we're doing this and that. And she's like, hey, basically you're just telling everyone what I'm doing, so it definitely is so much. It definitely is so much a team effort.
Right.
Completely.
It's true.
So.
That's funny. No, that's very, very true. Right. You head up our membership ministries and the outreach ministries and the educational ministries, of course, with my wife. And your wife is right in there leading the way, and you're getting all the credit. So may God bless them. All right. 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Would love to hear from you if you have questions about the diaconate. Are you considering entering the diaconate as a vocational ministry? There are many men here. Actually, I've heard from some of them online that were very interested in this. We would love to hear from you. So, Father Deacon, let's lay it out here. What is the purpose of the ministry of the deacon, biblically and historically, and in the contemporary church? From an ideal standpoint, what's the ministry of the deacon?
So, as you mentioned earlier, that the word deacon literally means a servant. So, in a sense, we're all called, of course, to be, we are all servants of God. We're all called to be a deacon to some extent. But I guess I would say that, as an ordained position, the deacon is called to be a lead servant of sorts, which sounds kind of like an oxymoron, but to be a lead servant. And
Sure.
in the book of Acts, it was clear that originally the deacons were meant to fulfill charitable duties, and really there's no mention in that original passage about liturgical duties. So primarily it was to make sure the people's needs, their physical needs, were cared for, so that the apostles could focus on the spiritual needs of the people. Then, of course, historically as the liturgy developed, the deacon was a major component. You could say, in the church, that he was a sort of a bouncer, kind of monitoring the temple, and there really were it's recorded that there was at one point, more than 100 deacons in the, Hagia Sophia in Constantinople. So it was not just liturgical, but also monitoring order within the church and the services. So of course, so much has changed, and the American experience, as you described, I remember when I was, growing up, that it was really only one time that I recalled a deacon coming, and it was, for our 90th anniversary, kind of as exactly as you described. And in my mind, it was kind of bizarre. I actually didn't really. I thought maybe the deacon was like a step above a priest, because he came with a bishop, and it was very confusing me as a child.
I will tell you,
he's more special.
Many deacons of bishops think they are a step above the priest. Trust me.
Fair point. Yeah.
I'm going to get some hate mail over that one.
Yeah, that was a dangerous one there. But and you see in the liturgy books from many years ago that it doesn't even mention a deacon, right? Everything, and sometimes I have some of those older books, and I'll pause and be like, wait, is this for me or for the priest? I think this is for me, but it says priest, so now thankfully that's largely changed, and we are seeing a revival of sorts, as you said, in the last few decades.
Very good.
But still, of course, the restoration of the charitable and the ministering role of the deacon I still do think needs to continue. I need to continue to grow in that myself, more than I already have. So that's kind of where we are today.
Yeah, and I think that's a very good way of laying it out. So maybe the one thing that I would add to that is just the observation that the thesis of this program is diaconal ministry beyond the liturgy. In other words, how can deacons function outside of the liturgical worship? What is their role? As beautiful as the liturgical function of the deacon is, and I don't discount that at all. Deacons with beautiful voices and kind of sweeping movements, they add such beauty to it. But what I love about the role of the deacon, like we said, there's sort of like two sides of it. There's the liturgical part, and then there's this social aspect of it where you're ministering to people. I think what that shows is that there is no division between these two things. In other words, we don't have a liturgical life and a social ministry. It's just our life. Right. Our liturgical life flows out of our social ministry. Our social ministry flows out of our liturgical life. In other words, this is all one movement. And the deacon being this very essential part of the ministerial aspect of outreach in the parish also naturally plays a role in the liturgical life of the parish, because he also ministers to the people in the parish and outside the parish. So I think, that unity of the life of parishioners, the life of Christians, the life of the parish should compel us to say, okay, we don't just have a liturgical life. We don't just have social ministries, but we just have our life as Orthodox Christians, and it should be reflected in all aspects of our parish life. 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Now, before we talk about some of these contemporary challenges for deacons, Father Deacon, I have a question for you, and that is, the deacon holds up this strip of his vestment. It's called the orarion, especially when he's proclaiming petitions and so forth. Why does he hold that up? What is the purpose of holding up that orarion when you proclaim the petitions in the Divine Liturgy?
Yeah, so I'll be happy to answer that. And then I do want to relate to what you just were talking about, that the liturgical functions of the deacon should be a natural outgrowth, as you described, of the social functions. And the deacon is supposed to be the link between the people and the priest. So it makes sense during the liturgy that he's standing outside the altar, but he's separate, elevated from the people at the same time. So this liturgical imagery really should be, as you said, reflected in what our life is and what our role is as a deacon. But the orarion, it is a sign of God's grace and the ordination of the deacon, similar to the flowing nature of it reflects like the oil poured over the head of an anointed one. And when it's being held up, that is practically a sign of attention, right? To get the attention of the people and to kind of direct the attention of the people. But historically, the orarion was likely adopted over time because there was a scroll of paper that was used for the petitions and would have the names of the sick and those that are being prayed for. So it was kind of natural that as we moved from scrolls towards printed books, that it became a formal vestment to kind of bring those things together, drawing the attention of the people to the prayers and to represent the grace given to the deacon.
Great. And just for our listeners too, so they understand, that orarion is, if you notice, it's hanging off of one shoulder on the deacon, hanging down his back and his front. And then a priest has what's called an epitrachelion, or sometimes in English we say the stole. And all it is really is the orarion brought around his neck as the kind of shepherd, and then they're joined at the front. That's really the stole is the orarion, because the deacon is not fully in the priesthood. So he has only one side of that hanging in the front, and then the priest has both sides, and the bishop, the same, has both sides hanging up front. 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Father Deacon, so let's talk about the contemporary challenges. So 2021, you had alluded to some of these things, but if you had to assess the contemporary role of the deacon right now, what challenges would you say deacons have in terms of, how contemporary Orthodoxy utilizes or does not utilize the diaconate?
Sure. So, two main challenges I'd say is, the first one is, I gained a lot from my training, and I learned a lot about the doctrines, church history, and liturgical functions. But one thing that I've had to develop, and God forbid me, I have a lot of growing to do with it, of course, but the pastoral side of that role and the organizational side of that role has been largely something that has to be learned by experience. So, we're discussing what particular, how the deacon we should move towards this greater social ministry involvement. But a lot of that has to be kind of learned on the spot right now. And then I would say the second, major challenge is just the expectations of people within the parish. Really by no fault of their own, of course, but that as they, grew up not seeing that role of a deacon, deacon's supposed to be, the priest's eyes and ears, but, I'll admit that I'm often asking you, things that are happening to try to get caught up, because that is, the people naturally will go to the priest first, and then kind of the deacon second. So to be able to, it's a challenge of kind of changing the culture and the expectations within the parish and the people. And then I guess I would just add briefly that a challenge that also exists is not letting yourself to focus too much on the liturgy. I mean, of course, that's extremely important, but I'll catch myself often focusing on the sound of my voice, rather than focus on the prayer and what we are saying. To not fall in that kind of that trap myself is sometimes a challenge too.
Yeah, and of course, everyone that serves liturgically, whether it is a deacon, priest, bishop, choir singer, reader, we all have that challenge in really focusing on glorifying God and not necessarily simply, glorifying ourselves or glorifying our voice. Very, very good. All right, we are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to continue speaking with Deacon Luke Laboda, and we're talking about expanding the role of the diaconate beyond the liturgical ministry. You're listening to Ancient Faith Today. We'll be right back.
Father Tom will be back in a moment. In the meantime, the lines are open at 855-237-2346. Don't go away.
You have that RV that blared out a warning that some type of an explosion was coming. It happened on Christmas Day.
Tonight, that powerful Hurricane Zeta is slamming into Louisiana at 110 miles per hour.
It's moving at breakneck speeds firefighters rarely see, exploding across the Sierra National Forest.
This Sunday, assault on democracy.
To slow the spread of the coronavirus, as you can see, we are heading in the wrong direction, and we are heading there very fast.
In these uncertain times, it is difficult to know who to trust and where to turn for guidance on the issues of the day. How does one nurture and maintain an orthodox mindset in the midst of what seems at times like crisis after crisis? Where are the gentle and discerning voices that speak reason and hope in a way that cuts through the cacophony of panic and unrest that surrounds us everywhere? When you are feeling lost and overwhelmed in this age of turmoil, or like your Orthodox faith no longer pertains to contemporary society and its challenges, one place you can go for refreshment, renewal, and just plain good sense is Ancient Faith Radio.
As Orthodox Christians, we don't oppose medicine. We see the wonders of such progress as a sign of the higher faculties of man, even the image of God, which allows us to think higher thoughts, to create, to inform, and even to build.
So God decided that there had to be a world with holocausts, with tsunamis, with murders of children, with all these horrible, horrible things. And when we hear them all, what comes to the mind of a believer is, first of all, thanks be to God that this is not the final word.
Our struggle to live according to God's ultimate and original plan is a journey to reclaim our true nature, restore communion with God, and ultimately return all of creation to the state God had originally intended.
Ancient Faith Radio, your home for Orthodox teaching, Orthodox music, and reliable cultural insight from an Orthodox perspective. Thanks for listening, and thanks so much for your support.
We're back with Ancient Faith Today and Father Tom Soroka. Give us a call at 855-237-2346. Here once again is Father Tom.
Welcome back to Ancient Faith Today. We're talking with Deacon Luke Laboda, and we are speaking about the role of the deacon and moving that role simply out from solely being liturgical into a ministerial, true ministerial role. And we have a caller, Father Deacon. We have Nathaniel from Indiana. Nathaniel, welcome to Ancient Faith Today. You're on the line with Deacon Luke Laboda.
Good evening, Father.
Good evening.
So my question is, for those of us who are serving in our church, how do we gauge how do we, I guess, help discern if we're called farther than, altar serving or serving as a reader? How should we test that and kind of gauge and guide that conversation with our priests and our bishops?
Great question. Father
Sure.
Deacon?
So, yeah, I mean, I would say, to, of course, get as involved as you can in the life of the church, in the ministries, and reaching both, inward within the parish, to find the needs of those who are members of the parish, and then also to look to reach out and see what opportunities there are within the local community. And if you begin doing those, you don't have to be, of course, ordained to take those steps, and then have a conversation with your spiritual father about how to best serve the church, and if that's the capacity that he believes is appropriate, then he'll communicate that to you.
Okay, awesome.
Nathaniel, what do you think about that?
That makes sense to me. it's been one of those things I've been trying to figure out my vocation within the church since I try to show up to every service, and I've been serving at the altar and serving as a reader, and it's just trying to gauge what God's calling is for me in that regard. So I appreciate the answer and your guys' episode tonight.
Nathaniel, before you go, let me maybe just add a little bit of color there, and that is this idea of calling or vocation. This is different for everyone. This is often something that wells up within us, but also is confirmed by other people. In other words, for instance, when Deacon Luke said, he had often thought about it, and then I approached him, and there was this kind of symbiotic relationship where we were both on the same page. In other words, often when somebody is feeling like they are called to the ministerial priesthood, diaconate, episcopacy, whatever, that is often already recognized by others. And so it's important to kind of have that be in tune with our public face and how we are comporting ourselves to others, because, and I'll be very honest with you, there are times when people will approach priests and will say, hey, I want to be a deacon, but it's very obvious they don't come to church, they're not interested in studying, they are, they're just, it's maybe about self-aggrandizement or whatever it is. And so it's important, as Father Deacon Luke said, to be out there in the parish, serving selflessly, to not look for offices and so forth. And then God himself brings this forward and works in people's hearts and works in your hearts, and somehow that time is right. And so if you feel like that's what's going on, and you and your priest or your bishop are on the same page about that, don't hesitate to say something. And of course, let's also point out, like, for instance, the scriptures talk about the qualifications of a deacon in 1 Timothy chapter 3. These things are actually very important, about holding the faith with a clear conscience, having, being found blameless, not addicted to wine, being the husband of one wife, et cetera, et cetera. All of those things are, of course, part of the discrimination about whether we are going to be into the ministerial priesthood or not. So may God help you with that.
Thank you, Father.
All right.
Thank you.
Great. Very good. Thanks for calling. 1-855-AF-RADIO. That's 1-855-237-2346. Okay. So, Father Deacon, we talked about some of the challenges, for instance, in the contemporary role of deacon. Obviously, you, and I'm not just speaking about you, but I would say this is 99% of the Orthodox deacons in America. They are not paid. And if they are, it's maybe some, sort of minor stipend. So they have a full-time job already, as do, unfortunately, a growing number of priests have a full-time job. And so they're trying to support their family, trying to run a parish and so forth. There's also the discrimination about, a deacon, it's not important. It's, you don't need a deacon, liturgically speaking. It's just the stepping stone to the priesthood. Or we have the view of the diaconate that sometimes is just, it's just the stepping stone to the priesthood. So if you were to say, okay, here's the vision, the ideal vision for the ministry of the diaconate, no matter where, America, Europe, Middle East, whatever, what would be your ideal vision and use of the ministry of the diaconate in the church today? How do you feel like deacons need to be used and utilized, I should say, and are not being utilized?
So you did use the word ideally, of course. So we're far
Absolutely.
away from that. I mean, ideally, the deacon would be a full-time position, as you alluded to there. That it would be like most priests that are full-time positions that would be provided through the church, so that there would not be any need to divide your time, because if you're going to fulfill these, the role of the physical needs of the people there, it's almost endless, you could say. Ministering within the parish to those who are sick, those that are shut in, possibly bring them communion, to give them companionship, to visit those that are in the hospital, to develop programs for those that have different kind of needs within the parish, but then also outside the parish to ideally to lead the church in its charitable efforts to the community immediately outside your parish. And whatever those needs are, whether they are economic needs, whether they are spiritual, people that are seeking to be, as I mentioned before, that link between the people and the priest would be ideal, so that it is just too much for one, for the priest to be both fulfilling all the spiritual needs of the people as well as all the physical needs of the people. So ideally, as the book of Acts says, it should be all the physical needs through the deacon, and that would have to be a full-time position ideally.
Right. It is a sort of catch-22, because often I hear the complaint or see the complaint online, people bemoaning that maybe the standard of preaching in the Orthodox Church can be, not, of course not all, but can be poor. And I if you'll allow me a little bit of latitude here,
Sure.
The one issue about being a parish priest that is really quite difficult is still the mentality that the priest basically has to be the center of everything, or has to do everything. And this could be the priest's fault. In other words, priests may want to control everything, or there can also be the idea that people expect, well, we pay him and we should be, he should be doing everything, But if you go back and look at the book of Acts, where the apostles say, look, we don't have time to serve tables. We don't have time to pass out this food to the distribution, right? That's the whole Act 6 thing that's going on there. And also preach the word of God. So in the contemporary church, priests are unable to do all the things that are sort of at the top of the list, that are most important, when they also have to be doing certain things that, maybe they could delegate to other people like deacons. And so I think there's an opportunity here, which of course, as you said, is constrained by finances. And, I want to appeal to everyone that, there in a sense, we sort of get what we pay for. I hate to put it that way, and I don't mean to sound ungrateful. I am very grateful for my parish supporting me and our family and so forth. On the other hand, there are many, many priests that are, pulling a full-time job, plus pulling a full-time parish, plus doing everything that should be tasks for a deacon. And so our vision is suffering in the parishes, because we are constrained by this idea of not having a full complement of the ministerial priesthood, having a priest or numerous priests and a deacon or numerous deacons. 1-855-AF radio. That's 1-855-237-2346. Father Deacon, let's turn our attention to the ministries. Oh yeah, please go ahead.
Small comment
Absolutely.
about what you just said there. That made me think about, within the liturgy that, we have the prayers which the priest will sometimes read, silently, and the deacon is saying these petitions that are kind of more, you could say, more basic. And so you mentioned it's a constraint of finances, but maybe even more so, it's a constraint of time and focus. That the priest can't do the litany and also pray the the silent prayers that are more, you could argue, more theologically complex, and so that's kind of reflected in the liturgy as well, that the more physical, the deacons here are talking about these more physical needs, and the priest is praying these spiritual prayers.
It's very, very good point. The divine liturgy is designed to be served by a deacon and a priest, right? You've experienced that now, that there are functions that are supposed to be happening simultaneously by both the deacon and the priest. I love that. That was fantastic. That was worth the price of admission right there. That was outstanding. Very, very good. Really good. All right. So let's turn our attention now to parish ministries. So often, and I'll use our parish as an example, parishes are a little bit hesitant, for whatever reason, to reach out to the community. They may feel that it's beyond them. They may feel maybe a lack of a need to reach out beyond the community. In other words, we are who we are, and we're not concerned with outside people. So let's talk a little bit about, you have in our parish expanded our vision about what ministry and what outreach is. So what are some of the challenges that parishes experience, and how can they overcome those particular things? What are some of the challenges to expanding ministries in the parish?
Yeah, so I would say there's internal challenges and external challenges. So you mentioned a few of those internal challenges where we sometimes you have to ask, do we truly believe that orthodoxy is for everyone? If we have an overemphasis on ethnicity or identity, and we sometimes doubt that this is really something that is for everyone. Then there's the challenge of feeling overwhelmed, or thinking, well, what, we're such a small parish, what good would come of this? Can we really make a difference? And I'll say for our parish, that I always viewed it that if our efforts brought one person to the Orthodox faith, that would be a success. And sometimes we have held events that maybe there was less than 10 people there, and you might sometimes feel like, that really was a bust, or that was unsuccessful. But I think you have to be careful, and you have to avoid letting yourself be afraid of that, because really in the Gospels, Christ talks about the parables of the lost coin or the lost sheep, and Christ is not measuring things in pure numbers, right? It's not like, okay, once we get, I have to catch myself doing this too, once we get this many people, that means it was a success. When really, I mean, if we just plant a seed of love within someone that comes to us that is in need, that's going to be a success, even if it is just a small seed. So that's a challenge that I think a lot of parishes, struggle with feeling that sense of it's just too overwhelming, and will it be a success? Because I know that we began about 5 years ago. We began doing a community open house, and so we would. Sadly, because of the pandemic, we weren't able to do it in the same way last year. Hopefully, maybe this year will be different. But we would go.
Father Deacon, before you talk about the open house, tell our listeners a little bit about the area where our parish is located, so that they understand the context of why this is a challenge.
Yes. So our parish is located in a struggling, an economically struggling area that which is common to many Orthodox parishes in the industrial areas. That it was where all the Orthodox immigrants had lived 100 years ago or so, and and now they're no longer there, and it's the steel mills have shut down, or the railroads have changed, and there's not the economic opportunity in the area anymore. So really, most of our parishioners are driving, at least 10 minutes, in some cases, over 30 minutes, sometimes 45 minutes to get to our parish. So that's a challenge that, for many people, this is, the fear about interacting with people of different backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, racial background. And really, I'm not going to say it's always been easy, because it definitely has been a challenge. And, I know for myself that I was not always comfortable, reaching out and having conversations with people. But as with anything, as you do it more and more, it becomes more natural, and your discomfort eventually goes away to a large extent. And I've noticed in my experience that when we had this community open house, that we invited everyone in the we are in the McKees Rocks Bottoms, so in that block, those blocks of maybe say 5 or 6 blocks either way from our church, we go around and personally invite people with, if they answer the door, we'd personally invite them. If not, we'd put something in their mailbox. And,
and it's almost all Section 8 housing, housing, very transient, former, people that are getting out of prison, lower, very low socioeconomic class. Yeah, absolutely.
And, when we bring them into the church, we have food and get to know them a little bit, and then, invite them into the church. And just several times, they would be just, despite their different background, they'd be just struck by the beauty of the iconography, and they would just kind of be speechless sometimes, and just say, I didn't know this was in my neighborhood. Right? I mean, I didn't know this something so beautiful was
heard
here.
That so many times, right?
Of course, that's our job, is to make sure that they do know that it is there. And if we just, to some degree, it's always about us kind of getting out of the way in a way, get out of the way of this person who's different than me and God, and just to allow them to have that encounter. And sometimes, that doesn't mean that every instance is going to be a success, of course, but that's not necessarily, you can't count that in a specific number of converts, or so many visitors or added attendance. It is about building a relationship with the community, so that they know that we love them and care about them, and if they need us, that we are there for them.
Good. Father Deacon, I want to go on with this a little bit, but because I want to get to some other details about things that you are doing in the parish and what deacons can do. We do have a couple of questions that came up on the Facebook page. One says, and it was something that we talked a little bit about earlier, but maybe you could expand on this. I want to ask a question. This is from Elias about the importance of a deacon's wife in the ministry of serving the church. So in some traditions, they call her diaconissa. But what is the importance of the deacon's wife in the ministry of serving the church?
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's extremely important. I know for me, personally, that my wife, Matusha Ashley, has always been very full of ideas, and she has great organizational skills that I really do lean on often, to help organize, thoughts and ideas and how to go about accomplishing tasks. So, part of it is having someone, of course, to work with and brainstorm, but of course, women within the parish do have a unique, function and ability to, talk to other mothers and, learn about, what the needs of families are within the church. That is much more natural to them than me coming over, and the conversations between mothers are, of course, different, and that's extremely important.
Excellent.
I would say,
Great.
Irreplaceable to have that.
Excellent. Outstanding. And there's another question here from Manolo, and he asks, and I'm sort of paraphrasing here, in his diocese, he speaks about the need for vocations and how they're saying that the bishops are saying that there's a lot of priests that are retiring soon and we need people to step up to holy orders. But on the other hand, they're having difficulty in, he says here, I'm trying to put this in a certain way, but he says that even just to be made a subdeacon, they're having difficulty in their diocese. So in other words, on the one hand, the bishops and the administration of the diocese are saying, we need new priests, we need whatever. But on the other hand, they're not being proactive in reaching out to men that might be good candidates for holy orders, and especially in the subject tonight of the diaconate. So is there any practical advice that you could give Manolo about how he might go about speaking with someone to help them understand that they need to be a little bit more proactive?
So, that's a difficult one, of course. So, I would say just on the level of speaking to people within the parish and helping them to understand that everyone can, of course, play an important role within the church, and that it's not always things that you think you're good at. We kind of sometimes are not, God is much more accurate in what we are capable of and judging our talents than we often are. I would say that speaking to men within the parish, often there's such a focus, and maybe part of this is the changes in our society with delayed marriage being much later and families being much later. And that's really a prime time when historically men are coming into their own, so to speak, or when they're in their physical prime to now you're being a father rather than kind of engaging in your possible vocation. So I think there's maybe some societal things going on there, but also I think we have to make sure people look seriously at not just kind of a false sense of humility that I'm only able to do this much, but rather to let God really grow your talents within you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that opportunity, when people take that opportunity, hopefully the administrative structures of the church will see men who are serving in that way. And the other thing we want to say is, ordination is not the end all and be all of everything. In other words, people can serve outside of the ordination of the diaconate or the priesthood. However, I think that in the case of administrative structures that are maybe not as proactive, possibly having an honest conversation with them and saying, look, I can name 5 men that I think would be outstanding candidates for the Holy Diaconate. What would you like me to do to help, help you do that? Because often I think we don't understand that bishops have 20 other things going on. The chancellors have things going on. So it could be that, they say something and then they don't follow up with it, which of course I think is sort of a uniquely Orthodox sin that we have, where we're full of ideas, but we're weak on action. So Manolo, I hope that works out for you. But just talk to your diocesan administrative officials, speak with the chancellors, speak with the dean, even speak with a bishop, and encourage them to identify men and say you want to help do that. And if it's you, speak up and do that. All right, Father Deacon. So we're at the end of our hour. It went really quickly, and I appreciate your willingness to come on and talk a little bit about that.
Absolutely.
You had mentioned the outreach that we have to the community. Talk a little bit about some of the other ideas that you've had and that you've implemented and that we're doing right now in the parish as we wrap this up.
Sure. So, one thing that I would say from our experience is it's important to address the needs within the parish before you start to reach out. And that's one thing that we realized, that there was a need for more fellowship within the parish before we were able to take the steps to do the outreach. But right now,
good point.
We've kind of slowly transitioned from, and it's good to, of course, be engaged with, the nationwide charities, orthodoxy, like the OCMC or IOCC or Focus, and we were helping Focus do some things on the local level, and that's a good starting point. But one thing that we started to do was we realized that we really wanted to address the needs of the immediate area that we were in. So when we got to that point where we thought that we were ready to make that step, we began doing a monthly hot meal for people in the local community, and we kind of found that was a need we thought people needed, but it turned out that you kind of have to be careful that you are looking at what they think they need, not necessarily what you think they need. So we found that people were often looking for groceries and asking about some cans that we happen to have in the back on a back table, and so we decided to transition now from a monthly hot meal to a monthly food bank. So we just had our first Saturday recently, and it's a challenge, of course, to get that word out, and you really want to make it consistent. We have it the last Saturday of every month, and to keep that consistency with so much people being so transient in the area. But we had a good response to start, and we're very blessed to be able to serve.
Excellent. Father Deacon Luke Laboda, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and thanks for all that you do for our parish. Thank you for your ministry, your exemplary way in which you model the role of deacon. May God continue to increase his blessings to you and your family. May he bring us more worthy deacons so that they can serve in the church in the way that God has always intended. Thank you so much, Father Deacon, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to all the members of our church that help with these ministries.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Before I share a few final thoughts, I want to offer my sincere thanks again to Deacon Luke Laboda for joining us tonight. Thanks to Trudy for engineering the program, for everybody that's listening in, those who called in and those who fielded questions to us. Here's a few final thoughts. I'd like you to hear the words of our father among the saints, Ignatius of Antioch, a martyr and the disciple of the Apostle John the theologian. This is really, really early. This is like early 100s about the role of deacon. He writes, "In like manner, let everyone respect the deacons as they would respect Jesus Christ. And just as they respect the bishop as the type of the Father, and the priests as the council of God and college of the apostles, without these, it cannot be called a church." And that's our show for tonight. Remember to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/ancientfaithtoday. Share out our program after that's posted. Give us your feedback and contact us with any ideas or topics or persons that you might want to hear about. Join us next Tuesday evening for another edition of Ancient Faith Today. Good night, everybody.
Lord, how are they increased